Welcome everyone. Thank you for joining. And I'm so excited here for this third episode of the Power of Intentional Partnerships. This mini-series was a result of our CEPHR value of agility right in the making. I was talking to another partner and we were talking about the work that we're doing. And I said, we should really talk about that more. We should feature it more. And so that became episode number 1. So here we are. I think this is maybe my 5th or 6th LinkedIn Live, but it's such a blessing to be able to highlight these partners and be able to showcase all the work that they do as well as what we do together. So I love a good brainstorming session, especially when it comes up to some good things that come out of that. So now I get the distinct honor of highlighting these folks, these incredible partners and their work. Thank you for joining. But really we want to talk about, for if you're newer here or you haven't seen this mini-series just yet, we want to talk about this partnership. What goes into it? Maybe you are an entrepreneur, you're considering exploring some partnerships. So what's the secret sauce? What goes into this? What goes into the mix? And so I've been proud to highlight each and every one of these partners. You'll see more of them. And so some of you might be curious, what does that look like? How do you make it work? How do you collectively showcase things, but make sure that you get your individual needs met as well? And so today I'm excited to introduce you to my friend and guest, Kim Meninger, executive coach and consultant at Your Career Success, speaker and host of the Impostor Syndrome Files podcast. Kim has been a trusted business resource, supporter of the annual Future of Work and International Women's Day Conference at Meenakshi, the partner we highlighted last time for you, the partnership that we co-host this conference. And Kim and I are always sharing ways and by way of support to look for business for each other. But I'll allow her to share a little bit deeper dive into her work, why she does it, how we are. And so please allow me to introduce you to my wonderful friend and partner, Kim Meninger. Welcome, Kim.
Thank you so much, Tiffany. It is so exciting to be here today.
So excited. We got our CEPHR tees on. Good morning. Good morning. Hi, Phil. Hi, Meenakshi. Thanks for joining. So Kim, that was just a little brief highlight that I gave you. Tell us a bit more about what you do at Your Career Success and what makes you excited about it.
Thank you. So I have been talking most recently about the work I do as really focused on helping people navigate what makes it hard to be human in the workplace. I think there's a lot of conversations, rightfully so, about how to be a more effective leader and how to build certain skills and competencies. But my approach is more so to focus on, well, I know what I'm supposed to do, but what if I have imposter syndrome? Or what if I don't feel like I belong in my organization? Or what if I don't feel like I have enough psychological safety? And so I try to look at the messy human side of the work experience and give people strategies and tools that they can use to empower themselves and to just navigate them with greater confidence. And so that's really what gets me excited. I spent over 10 years in the high-tech industry, so I know firsthand a lot of the messy side of work, and I was in the shoes of so many of the people that I now support today. And I just feel like we are reaching this point in history, hopefully, where there is more of an appreciation for humanity in the workplace. I'm going to do everything I can to make sure we don't lose focus on that as we continue to come out of the pandemic. So really, that's what brings me joy. It makes me feel fulfilled in the work that I do.
I love that. Thank you for sharing that. And I know that we share the value of making it better for humanity in the workplace. And every single partner who I have highlighted to date, Kim, you just touched on that as well. And that is definitely a CEPHR value as well, is making sure that who we are before we come to work, as we're at work, when we leave work, that there's no separation of that really. There truly is an integration into that. And I love the work that you're doing and your call that you lead every Thursday as well, Leading Humans, it's called. So you want to tell us a little bit more about that?
Sure. So I will say that in some ways, it was sort of a selfish initiative. I wanted to have a space where I could have deeper conversations than we typically have in networking events. And, there's a limited amount of time and people often feel like they can't fully share what's on their mind or be vulnerable with each other when they're in certain spaces. And so I wanted to create a safe and trusted space where we could dig deeper into what some of the challenges are in the workplace, the stories that we tell ourselves. And so I started this group. Really, it kind of took off at the start of the pandemic when people were looking for more human connection, and we were suddenly thrust into this world where we all worked at home all the time. And it still continues to this day. And it's just such a magical place where people come together and just have conversations that I believe aren't really happening anywhere else, or at least not in accessible ways.
Thank you. And I've had the opportunity, I know Meenakshi, who's here, has had the opportunity as well to really connect with these folks. And every time that I'm able to join, it's just such an amazing, it's such an amazing experience. And, when you look at all of the things that we may be struggling with or questions we may have, it's an open forum for folks to be in such a welcoming, inclusive space to more values that we share. And I think that it's so important. And you touched on before this kind of the messiness that can happen. And that is also something that, I know that I've talked to you about. It's something that we deal with at CEPHR from an HR perspective. I know Meenakshi deals with it with the leadership that she's dealing with. And so it's really important. And I think it's important that we call that out too, right? It's not linear. It's not always a perfect space or a perfect line. The workplace and the things that go into it and change management can be very messy, but it doesn't mean that we can't get to good outcomes or that there's not this beautiful space to create and really lean in and learn from each other in the middle, right?
Yeah.
And so I really appreciate that you shared that. And I forgot to share too. I wanted to share definitely how we connected. So you were doing, this was at the start of the pandemic, and you were doing a session on imposter syndrome and kind of leadership and being self-managed. And this was like right at the height of it. And I'm like, I just need to know more about Kim Meninger. She seems amazing. I learned so much. You have this wonderful, calming way about you and the way that you go about your work. And I just was so impressed and also excited to hear and learn more about your work. And so I'm like, I wonder if she'll connect with me. So I popped onto LinkedIn and I sent you a note and I was so excited about it. And then when you wrote back, I'm like, yay, because you were just larger than life to me. And I just was feeling very grateful that we had this opportunity. And then you made an offer for me to be on your podcast. And I was like, do I have something to add here? And then I was like, of course I do, because yes, imposter syndrome is very real, which is why I resonated with the session that you were hosting virtually that day. And so it's just kind of been up from here. You've been a speaker at the annual conference that the International Women's Day Future Work Conference that Meenakshi and I co-host annually. And that's been great on mentorship, allies, and sponsors. You had so much rich information to offer there. And so that was just really amazing too. And then hosting the Continuing the Race conversation on your podcast as well. So I really feel like everything has come full circle. I'm very grateful to call you a friend and a partner. And I just, yeah. So you want to share anything about any of the projects that I just talked about, or why and what it means to you to partner with CEPHR?
It's so interesting. I'm so glad that you told that story about how we connected, because sometimes I forget. I feel like I've known you forever and I forget, like, oh yeah, there was a time when you reached out and we didn't know each other. And I'm just so grateful that we live in a world where the geographic barriers are so much easier to transcend, right? I think that maybe obviously we've been on LinkedIn for a while, but I think the pandemic really brought to the surface that you can connect with other people meaningfully and not be in the same physical space as them. And so I was so grateful when you reached out. And I think all of the conversations that we have had since have reinforced our shared values, our shared mission. And we have had this opportunity to kind of bring each other into each other's spaces and into each other's work. And I really think that is one of the things that I most enjoy about being an entrepreneur, because being an entrepreneur can be a really lonely space, especially when you're used to working in an organization. I worked for a big organization that had, people everywhere, and there was always somebody that you could go to and bounce an idea off of. And there was just energy that came with being part of a collective. And I'm somebody who tends to be more extroverted, so I like that energy. And that's probably the one and only thing I miss about working. And so having the opportunity to partner with you, it gives that kind of energy to entrepreneurship that, I have missed from my past life.
I have to agree. Thanks. And it's been an interesting space. I've been having a lot of conversations around, how it's been like 3 years. We're in this now kind of moving more into a hybrid space. A lot of people going back to the office, but we're seeing even more companies who are still on this remote first kind of journey to getting Airbnbs for their folks and all these things. And so people are all over the place. And as an entrepreneur, that's something that I'm seeing as well with my clients, that some distributed workforces. It's really trying to like keep track of it all. But for me, I've had some opportunities to be able to work kind of in different situations where maybe I traveled a lot regionally. And so I could start my day or end my day with some flexibility at home. But never really had like a true remote role. And I think truly the pandemic, I consider you a 2020 gift. I always have my hashtag for that, as well as Meenakshi, who's here. But definitely something that's important to keep in mind is that we all work differently. We have different learning styles. For me, I love to work from home because it's the way that I work best. It allows me that focused, dedicated heads down time, but I also am energized and miss the buzz of the office. And so getting to partner with folks like you, collaborating on different things, making sure there's like calls to just stay in touch and connected is really important. And so, it's important for other entrepreneurs to hear that as well as you're considering that. If you're considering partnerships or you're considering, entrepreneurship, or you are in entrepreneurship, Phil and I, Phil Davis is in the audience here too. And we stay connected. It's really important because it can be really lonely and you can just be sitting here with your thoughts and feeling like, oh, am I the only one facing this problem? In fact, recently you and Meenakshi and I, the terrific trio, I can't talk today, as we deemed ourselves, coined ourselves. We were talking recently about pricing and just sharing vulnerably and openly. That's the other beauty of partnerships is transparency and having a level of psychological safety to make sure that you can connect with each other and that you can share not only your wins, but your challenges. There are struggles along the way. Let's be honest, right?
Yes. Well, I'm so glad you brought that up because I was thinking the same thing about our recent conversation and how it was so nice to be able to just safely talk about things that not a lot of other people maybe are openly discussing and that we have questions about, but we're not sure where to get answers from. Mm-hmm. And I think that sometimes it feels like everyone else has access to a playbook that we don't have. And it feels like, is it even safe to ask this question? Is this an appropriate question? And so I think that being able to have the kinds of conversations that we've had where we've been able to just trust each other and be open and then get information that's really helpful to us as we drive our business forward is such a powerful part of this whole partnership experience that we're talking about.
It really is. And I think, that's something that I came into a bit later. And I think, we all kind of have. And so the sooner, that's why I thought this was important too, to share with people, because often we get so, and I know you see this in your work a lot, Kim, we get in our own heads and we think we can't do something or that we're not capable of doing it, or we believe that we're capable. But when we meet that, and you were one of the people who really brought this to the forefront to me, is like, why am I afraid to do the thing that I wanted most? Or why is this, I know that I can do it, but I'm fearing like now it's actually going to happen. Now what do I do? And it's something like, I thought I was the only one who faced that. And it was through listening to your podcast that I was like, oh my gosh, I'm not the only one. There is this. And now, of course, I hear more conversations around the fact that once we get what we want, maybe it's speaking in front of a large audience or a specific type of client that you're looking for. Maybe it is striking up that partnership or doing that thing that you've never done before. And it's like you get so excited and then the moment comes and you're like, no, and you want to run away. Can you like offer any tips or thoughts for people? Because that was like a pivotal moment for me. Like, hearing that on your podcast, that other people face this too. And it's actually a thing, not just a thing in my head.
Yes. And thank you for bringing that up, because I think that's such an important part of everything that we're talking about, is that feeling of, I'm really excited to achieve something. And then as soon as I do, I think, oh no, I've made a huge mistake, right? Like, what have I done? And I heard something once that really stuck with me. And it was a quote. Somebody once said, the only difference between excitement and anxiety is the story that you tell yourself. And I think that really resonated with me, because our brains don't really know the difference between those two feelings. If you think about it, it's that same kind of, your stomach feels like it has butterflies, your heart starts to race. It's the same feeling you have on a first date that you have when you're going to be giving a presentation that's terrifying you. And so if you reframe it as, the reason I feel this way is because I'm excited. This is finally happening for me, right? This is this exciting moment. Then it makes it more, I think, manageable, right? And you don't get in your head as much. The thing is, like, imagine that you get that great opportunity to speak in front of this audience that you've wanted to speak to for a while, and you felt nothing, right? Like, what would that tell you? It's like, we want to feel excited. It means we care. It means that it's something that's important to us. And so what's really important is not that we try to make those feelings go away. It's just that we understand what their purpose is. And I think a lot of times when we're trying something new, there is that sense our brains have that, uh-oh, this might be dangerous. We can't predict what's going to happen here. This is uncertain. This is kind of a threat. And so if we know that that's what's happening, we can reinterpret the messages that we're giving ourselves through that lens of, like, no, it's not a fact that you're going to fail. It's just your brain's way of trying to get you out of an unsafe situation, or a situation it perceives to be dangerous. And so we have a choice as to how we interpret the experience that we have around these, like, scary but exciting things.
Yeah, I love that. And I always appreciate, this is one of the things I appreciate about your coaching, is that in coaching in general, is the reframe. And so it's so important, because we can tell ourselves the most god awful stories. And I think that there's a healthy balance to, like, anticipation of what can happen and the worst that can happen, right? But usually it's not as big. And I never believed people when they said this until I started experiencing more of life, especially as an entrepreneur. It's like, the thing that you think is so scary and the worst thing that can happen usually doesn't, because we make it so big and extreme in our own heads. So I really appreciate, you talking about that. And there's such a vulnerability to, I think, work and the future of work. And I think we're seeing more of that too. And so, having you be a coach to folks to understand, that these feelings, to normalize them, number one, but also that, we don't have to be like victims to those things or to our circumstances. And that's one of the things too that I love about your call every week, is that people can, in a safe space, bring up those conversations and really, be supported by other people, and just, the different methods that you're using. It's just amazing. And I really appreciate that work. So I wanted to share that too.
Thank you. I so appreciate you. Thank you.
Yeah, for sure. Are there things that, common things that you see either in your coaching or in your business, anything that you want to share with folks in terms of, maybe the future of work, or in terms of, if someone is looking for a partner or they're exploring that type of partnership, what would that be?
So it's interesting, because when I worked in high tech, I stumbled into high tech. I never had any intention of going into the corporate world. And so here I was, I had a psychology degree, a lot of enthusiasm, but no idea what I was doing in this world. And my whole career was focused on partner management. So I was always managing relationships with partners that we had for different purposes. Some of them were resellers, some were professional services, just different kinds of partnerships. So I learned very quickly the benefits from a business standpoint of partnering in this space. Like, this was something that I think was an advantage to me when I came out on my own, because my immediate thought was not, how do I do this on my own, but how do I find partners? It was just sort of baked into the way I saw the work world. But then once I started to get into this whole idea of partnering, it became clear that there are different types of partnership opportunities. And for me, I really came to a place where partnership isn't about the gain that you get at the end of it, right? Like partnership is the point. Partnership is the opportunity to build these meaningful connections with people that share your values and complement you in some way, right? Like, so, as we're talking about imposter syndrome and we're talking about a lot of the self-doubt that creeps in when we're doing new things, it is so nice to have people who have different skills than you have, who you don't have to try to do everything yourself. You have a space to ask questions, but also if someone comes in asks me, do you do workshops on this? I can say, I don't, but Tiffany does, right? So it's a very empowering experience on so many levels because it does make you feel less alone. You have this built-in support network and you have friendship, right? Like, I just think that relationship is so much a part of the journey. And what I see too often is people getting really transactional. It's like, what am I going to get out of this? And it's not to say that we shouldn't have business goals. And we're always, obviously, as entrepreneurs, we're trying to build our businesses. But I'm a big believer that if we focus on the relationships, the business will follow. If we really choose the right people in our worlds, then the opportunity will organically come. It's not with that. That's not the goal in and of itself.
I love that. So much of what you said is why this works and why every single partner that I work with, that I highlight, there is this magic. And I know other people who have partnerships may be like, whatever, I have the best partners, but I really, really do. And I think that people, I get so heart happy, right? Because I know that we share values. I know that I could turn over a client. In fact, I had a client who was looking for an executive coach and I was like, we need to talk to Kim. And so there are definitely those opportunities, but we're coming in because of the relationship. And that's truly how we've been able to build these deep friendships. Not to say that you have to be friends with your potential partners. I have, tech SaaS partners and we're not friends, but I also value what they do and I have to believe in their brand. And the same goes for partnership. You have to believe in what that person's saying, what they're about, their brand. And yes, if you can refer to each other, that's, business to each other, that's great too. And you've been really great that way too, Kim. And that's the beauty, especially, for us, those of us who are in the solopreneurship, to be able to have opportunities to say, hey, I can't, do that, or I'm at bandwidth, but, I know this great executive coach, Kim, and, that's not my niche and my skill. We add more value to our clients that way as well. And it feels good to refer business to someone else, as well as to be able to have that value that additional value can add to your clients. So they're not scrambling around looking for resources, which I feel is really important. So I'm so glad you touched on that too.
Yeah. And thank you. I think of it really as an extension of the mission of my business, which is around empowering people, right? So you empower your clients through the coaching or the services that you offer, but you empower your partners too, right? So it's another opportunity to give new opportunities to people that you care about. And, you made a good point too about the shared values and wanting to be able to stand behind your partners and believe in what they offer, because brands, as we've seen in the age of social media, can be very fragile. And I think that's important to think about too. So really having that comfort level that if I attach my name to this person, that I can trust that that's not going to undermine my brand in some way, right? And I think that's part of the benefit of having deeper relationships with people, is you get to know them in a way that you might not if you just are transactionally working with them and all you know is what's on their website, right? The more that we know each other, the more we know, yeah, we really do have very similar values and we care about very similar things.
Yeah. And thank you. It's building, everything starts with a relationship. Even if, Kim, you're looking at it from your own business perspective and I'm looking at it from mine, of course we have this overlap of these beautiful values and a friendship, but, those things don't always work out. And sometimes, that's a struggle for people, but you really have to have this concrete, I feel real good about my brand and I feel good about this other person's. And it's also about being able to have hard conversations or to give each other feedback. And that's something that I'm super grateful for too. And we have to be receptive to that, right? Like the way we give it makes a difference. But that is something I learn and grow alongside every single one of you as my partners. And that is the beauty is, it's also about the diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging of it all. We are better together. I would say together is better than alone. And so you get this beautiful mix of perspectives that are not your own, because as humans, we all think differently. We all approach our work in a different way. We have different learning styles. We're in different industries and different things we do. All of my partners are adjacent. None of them are actual HR professionals, but that makes it stronger. And I still get to learn from you all. And so that, I think, in the workplace and in business, if you're an entrepreneur and you're seeking out these partnerships, it's really important to be able to have tough conversations. And I do that all the time with, another partner where we're like, okay, so here's what I'm thinking, like, give me some feedback, right? Like we're always seeking that feedback. It's really, really important. So
that's another really important point, because we talk about shared values, but we don't have to be the same, right? And I think difference in style and just personality, like there are benefits to diversity. And if I often talk about this when I talk about different types of communication in the workplace and navigating conflict and things of that nature, is that sometimes we think people are difficult just because they're different than we are, right? And that doesn't make them difficult, it just makes them different. And I think that it's really important, if you want to grow, if you want to continue to stay challenged, to find people who do think differently from you, right? Because I think I often joke about the fact that I'm the kind of person who would gladly live in the land of ideas all day long, right? Like I love to just sit and brainstorm and think about what's not happening today that could happen in the future. It's super fun for me. But I know that I'm not going to get there without the help of somebody who is more detail-oriented and process-oriented. And so sometimes I get frustrated when my process-oriented friends start asking me questions like, well, how are you going to do that? And what's it going to look like? And I'm like, I don't know. I don't want to think about, right? Like, I just want to dream big, right? But I think those are the kinds of things we have to challenge ourselves to be open to, too, especially if you don't have a manager and you don't have, people in your work environment. Is you want to surround yourself with people who can give you that hard feedback, people who can not just agree with you and not just tell you all the things that you're doing well, but also help you to grow and expand if you want to continue down the road.
Yeah. And I love that you talked about expansion. It's so funny. Sometimes I have these often, very, very often with my partners, I have these moments and we're just like, how are we so aligned? Like you intentionally choose people, right? Because now in this space, as an entrepreneur, you get to choose who you work with, unlike the workplace where we're in this little melting pot of colleagues, and hopefully we get along, right? And hopefully we're all building towards the outcomes and goals of the organization. But I am constantly struck by, when I said I'm like heart happy too, this is another piece of that, is really feeling like these are folks who have my back. They will tell me though, like if I'm off the mark, because you care about me, and we're not just gonna, it's just like we practice with our clients. We're not just gonna tell you what you want to hear. That's not our role, or we're not doing our jobs very well. And it's the same with partnership. And it's something else that I appreciate. And not to say that we all have to be completely aligned, because that's where those perspectives come in from a DEIB perspective. But I also love that it's just like, I will have these just moments with each of you that it's like, wow, they just get me. And we don't always have those opportunities in life and work, right? So to have people behind you who you feel like, yes, they are about my brand, they are compatible with me from that viewpoint, as Meenakshi had shared in the chat too, I think is so important. And it boosts confidence, right? Like I know you talk a lot about confidence with the work that you do. It's super helpful to the process.
Yeah. And I think that point about confidence is so important, because when you are an entrepreneur, you don't get a lot of feedback necessarily in the same way that you would in the workplace. Like you have a certain amount of visual cues as to how you're doing. You may have peers who are doing similar work that you can kind of get a sense of how they do things. Your manager is telling you in different ways what you're doing. And so it's very isolating in a sense. And normally, I mean, your clients aren't going to say, oh, you should have thought about it this way, or, you just don't know what people are thinking. And so in the absence of feedback, whether that's direct or indirect, there's a lot of opportunity to make stuff up. There's a lot of opportunity, right, to start telling ourselves stuff that may or may not be true. And so I think that it can be like, for people like me who have lots of anxiety and over dramatize things, like it can be a dangerous place. And so it is really helpful to have a network of peers and partners and people that support you, that can help you feel grounded and can help you feel like you're part of a bigger system, and that you're not just this island out on your own who's making everything up and hoping for the best.
I love that. You are just, I love, this is why I love chatting with my partners, because it's, again, we're getting different perspectives of things, because feedback, for as much as we talk about it as coaches, as consultants, as we're working with our clients in our larger networks, our communities, it's not I never thought about that way until you said that, Kim. And it's true. As someone who's craving feedback all the time, and specific feedback, and someone as an HR professional who's like, that is not feedback to tell your employee they did a good job. That's great. That's recognition. But let's get specific about it. What about it was great? What about it could have used some improvement? How are you going to prepare to help support me to get there, right? But as entrepreneurs, like, yes, we might have had some stuff last week where there was like all these, things we were looking at from a client perspective, and we were sharing all this feedback back and forth, and it went on and on. But there's times when it's like, this is great. This really helped me. But we need to understand what is working, what's not. And as entrepreneurs, we have to maybe seek that from our partners, or, sometimes it's okay to pass that along, barring the confidentiality, all that stuff, to somebody else to have a second look, or just to have a think tank or a thought partner. And that is one of the greatest gifts of having these partnerships as well.
Absolutely. Yeah. Because again, like there's so much self-doubt in the absence of that, it's just to our benefit to seek that out.
What have you found? Because what I heard in something you said earlier is about, you talked about your anxiety and having partners to be able to have these conversations with. How do you make sure that you authentically show up at work? And, how are you kind of demonstrating that for other people, whether that's partners or your clients?
That's a good question. I think part of it for me is never hiding the messy side, right? Like I think I'm very comfortable saying I've had a lifelong anxiety disorder. I'm very comfortable sharing my story about imposter syndrome. And maybe that is a function of the privilege I now have of being an entrepreneur. And I'm not sure I would have necessarily had those conversations when I was working in the corporate world and felt the pressure to put on this persona. But as I've gotten older and as I've done more of this work, I have found it to be so liberating to just be true to what I'm thinking at the time and who I am. And it actually strengthens connection as opposed to undermining it. And so I try, and I think part of it is, and I think we've talked about this before, of how I moved every 2 years when I was growing up. So I was always the new kid. And I was always like super aware of fitting in and feeling like I was different from other people. And so I have always been driven by this need to make other people feel comfortable. I'm always aware of like who seems uncomfortable, who needs an extra welcome, who needs to really feel like they're being more brought into the group. And so I think that combination of just really wanting people to feel safe with me at the same time that I feel like I can share without worrying about what people are going to think, that like the inner workings of how I operate has allowed me to show up authentically. And it's interesting because my anxiety for a long time was very socially driven. I would always walk away from a conversation feeling like, I can't believe I said that, or I can't believe I didn't say this, or, you know, I'd have this constant conversation with myself that would never go away about like, you sounded like an idiot, or like all kinds of inner critic language. And now I've reached a point where I prioritize the value around being real more so than I prioritize the value of being so polished that people might not say like, oh, I can't believe she said that, right? I've definitely gotten to a place where I'm like, you know what? I may not be everybody's cup of tea. Right? Like, you know, not everybody's going to resonate with what I say, but the people that I'm here to serve and the people that are part of my world will. And so that's more important to me than just trying to be neutral in the hopes of pleasing everybody, which we know just doesn't ever work.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, there were so many nuggets out of there. I want to pull out, but that's what makes you good at what you do, because you have this connection. As humans, we crave that. Even the most introverted person, we need to be, as part of our basic human needs, to be able to connect with folks. And you talked about language and how important that is as well. And, you know, we're talking about exploring partnerships as entrepreneurs, but a lot of what you said can connect right back into the workplace if folks are working for other companies, because we still have to identify that. We still have to be self-led. We still want to be able to show up as our authentic selves and to be able to share those parts of us that we're comfortable sharing without feeling like, oh, what is that person thinking of me? It's who am I? Even at work, we can, you know, to a degree allow, you know, maybe we have people who are more tangential and we don't work on them with projects often, but maybe they're just not quite our vibe, and we're going to do what we need to do to get our work done. But we want to build that deep relationship too. And so I think just there was so much amazing in what you just shared. Yeah, and I think as women too, I know we've had these conversations around just how disparately impacted we are, how we feel like we have to show up different, how the conversation for ourselves looks different. I had a moment last week where it was really intense, and it's been a long time since I've cried at work, and it happened. And I was like, oh my gosh, this isn't happening. And I was like, Tiffany, you are your brand and you are human, and that is okay. And while maybe that wasn't ideal and what you wanted, you had a lot of stuff going on, and this is really intense, and this only magnified it. And so it was like permission. I always started talking about this permission to live out loud and to live into who you really are and that authenticity. And you said you feel privileged as an entrepreneur, and as do I, because there's a lot of things that I can control more and that I can control for that maybe I wasn't able to before. So any thoughts on that?
You had so many great things just there, right there. I'm trying to figure out which one to tap into first, because when I think about how you tied it back to the workplace, I think this is a helpful conversation for anybody listening who may not be an entrepreneur, right? Because I think that workplaces are set up in ways that really continue to prioritize competition over collaboration in a lot of ways. I mean, we really still evaluate people based on their individual contributions, and there is a lot of zero-sum game behavior in the workplace. And so it does create this sense of like, I can't be vulnerable because I'm going to get eaten alive kind of a mentality, right? And I think that, first of all, people need to understand their own work culture well enough to gauge how much psychological safety exists to be vulnerable. But I also think that a lot of times people are just waiting for someone else to make the first move. And if you really do start to reframe your peers and colleagues as partners, right? Not as, you know, other people who are trying to take your ideas, or as other people who are getting credit that you deserve, and all, you know, all of that, which sometimes happens, but that is liberating in a way, because it does take some of the pressure off of, I think about this from an imposter syndrome perspective too, of like when I was back working in high tech, I felt this pressure to know everything, to do everything, to be everything. And so if somebody else knew something that I didn't know, I felt like that was a weakness or a deficiency on my part, as opposed to being able to say, oh, thank God Bob knows that, so I don't have to, right? And so like Bob is my partner when it comes to this kind of activity or this kind of domain, and I can lean into the things that I do really well. And so as long as Bob isn't there ready to stab me in the back, like if I say that out loud, it gives me permission to say to Bob, you know, sometimes I feel a little bit uncomfortable in these conversations about this topic. Would you be willing to come with me to this meeting, so that if I feel like I start to reach the, you know, the highest level of what I understand, you can jump in and be there as an ally for me. But people don't necessarily naturally think to do that for one another, because we are so much in self-preservation mode. So many of us are just trying to protect our own image and trying to make sure that we get out without embarrassing ourselves or failing. But if we can really try to influence the environment, create space for everyone to do that, we end up with so much more collaboration, so much more trust and connection than we do under the current system.
Wow. Yes, absolutely. Plus one to all that, all that. But that is that DIB piece, right? Because we are, you know, it's so, and we're living in a time where everything is so divisive. And so I think it's, you know, perpetuating even more of this, like me, got to get my own. And in a hybrid work environment where people are like, you know, am I even seen? Like, do I have to do more if I'm, you know, if I'm a woman and I'm not, you know, in every day and visible? Like, does that create some disparate, you know, some disconnection from the office and from potential opportunities if I'm a new mom? There's just so much to unpack there. And I think that, you know, the more that we understand, and I appreciate you thinking of it as a partner, as an HR business partner in some of my roles, that truly is how we do. And that's how we've been able to advance HR from transactional to transformational, is really thinking of the business as your partner. And it's, you know, it's not about, you know, this competition. A little bit of healthy competition is good, but the connection, the collaboration, and, you know, we can build stronger together, you know, and not creating these silos in the organization. And I love that. I love it. I love it.
Yeah, I think that you're right. There's, I mean, a good amount of healthy competition is helpful. It keeps us on our toes, right? We want to keep challenging ourselves, but at the same time, if we're constantly focusing on who wins and who loses, you don't feel like you're on the same team anymore. And I think that's a really big loss to any, whether we're talking about partners in the entrepreneurial space or we're talking about partners in the workplace, right? As soon as you start to think that I lose something when the other person gains something, then the whole relationship falls apart.
Right. And you have to then wonder, what was the why, or what was the strategic play? You talked at the beginning about the playbook. What was the playbook in the beginning? Because how did we get here? And what questions maybe weren't asked? What, you know, how could we maybe have looked at this process in the spirit of continuous improvement? Because you have to wonder how you got to that point. If, you know, there's probably some misalignment somewhere or misinterpretation. Communication always has to be at the forefront too. And as we talked about language too, our language matters, how we communicate, how often, in the spaces in which that happens. So totally appreciating that too.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I'm a big proponent, whether it's in the workplace or anywhere else, to just really have relationship conversations. We often don't do that because they might feel awkward or they feel like we don't have enough time for them, but to just really say, like, who are we, right? What do I need to know about you in order to best support you and in order for us to work best together? Like, and that in some cases is going to be, what are your strengths? In some cases it's going to be like, what are your hot buttons? What are the things that if I do, you're going to be in a bad mood? And, you know, and especially in the workplace where people are triggering each other all over the place and don't realize it. And we're all making up stories about why people are behaving the way that we do. Like, let's take the guesswork out of it. Let's just have a conversation that says, you know, we're going to be working on this project together. What do you care most about? What does success look like to you? What are you most afraid of? Right? Like, what do I need to know about you? How are we going to communicate? What is going to annoy you? Things like that. Right. So then we're never going to get everything, but we'll have enough of a foundation that we can more easily predict each other's behavior. And I think that's what it's all about, right? It's like remove as much uncertainty from the equation as possible so that we can best show up with each other and for each other.
Absolutely. And that's the key, right? It's like, I think sometimes people, either it's a lack of confidence, lack of information, or something in the environment. Maybe there's a lack of psychological safety. I know we're both very in tune to making sure that there is that in the workplace. And I think that often that is a gap, and it causes all these other issues versus, you know, I know it can be scary to have conflict, but conflict's not always a bad thing, provided you're using the proper language and you're respecting the person and, you know, the mission, the goals of what you're trying to do. But I've seen so many times where it just gets so much worse because people bury their head in the sand. They don't want to deal with the conflict. And that is going to always magnify it, because then resentment builds. And then, you know, there's a lack of trust, and trust erodes, and so many bad things happen. Versus it's kind of like when we said, what's the worst thing that could happen? A lot of times people are like, wow, thank you for that feedback. They may not have been aware. So provided we're tactful about and diplomatic about how we're bringing that feedback forward, it's so important to do that. Like, do not hide from conversations, even if it's a little bit scary. Get a coach, work with someone, you know, HR, hello, shout out, a little thing there. But get someone who can be on your side and support you and ask the questions that you may not even be considering, right? I think that's such an important part of the equation.
You're absolutely right. And I think there's a sort of a proactive and a reactive piece to what you're describing, right? So if we are proactively as partners, whether that's in the workplace or outside of the workplace, checking in with each other periodically, are we still aligned, right? Are we still moving in the same direction? Are there ways in which we want to make some adjustments to this relationship so that it doesn't get to the point where we're both feeling really resentful, but not feeling like we can talk about it, right? I think that is a big part of the conversation too. And again, like those of us, I like to think of myself as a recovering people pleaser, although I can definitely fall into that trap pretty easily. You know, I don't like conflict any more than anybody else. I want people to like me. There's a lot of those traits that I have that might make me avoid conflict. But I think if we think about it more as like, it's less about waiting for something to explode and more about like, let's just be honest with each other, because partnerships can change, right? What worked at a one particular moment in time where we were in sync on our business goals and what we were working on may not be the case a year from now. And there's nothing personal about that. That doesn't mean that, you know, I'm a bad person or you're a bad person. It just means that we've shifted. And so if we can create opportunity to assess the shifts along the way, right, it makes it easier to prevent the conflict that we're trying to avoid.
I love that. You always just have this magical way of saying things. But I appreciate that. I definitely appreciate it. And I agree. It's okay and we want things, change is inevitable, right? Like how we manage that change is, you know, and what questions we ask and how we nurture the relationship, or, you know, if we do things on the opposite end of that spectrum, that makes a difference. And, you know, that really is a great responsibility, whether you are on a team or you're in a partnership in entrepreneurship. That nurturing of the relationship and constantly checking in to assess. And, you know, maybe you start out at the top of the wheel and everything's going and chugging along, but it's a cyclical thing. We always have to be checking in for feedback because things will change for the person, for the project. You know, even when you're collaborating together as partners, something may change on the client and you need to check in and make sure, are we still aligned in the direction we're going? That just happened with another partner last week. And we're like, okay, what are we going to do? Shift. But what does that shift look like? And making sure that you are protective of your individual and collective brands too, as you're doing that. And even in the workplace, if you're working for other people, you have a personal brand and you have a team brand. There's a larger organization, mission, vision, and brand. And so you want to connect to that too.
Well, and I think leadership is a big part of that too, because I think we're so often waiting for the other person to say,
Mm,
to make the first move or to say something. And I try to emphasize this with my kids too, of like, be a leader in these situations, right? Like be the leader. And just because someone else isn't saying this, just because someone else may be conflict avoidant, or you don't feel like this is the kind of conversation you would have with this person, doesn't mean that there isn't an opportunity for you to influence that dynamic. And
mm.
you're not responsible for what the other person says or how they respond, but you are responsible for whether or not you actually show up that way, right? Like, you take responsibility for your end of the relationship.
Yeah, 100%. And that's one of the things that I want to talk about too with these partnerships is there has to be accountability and responsibility. I can't just go off and do whatever I want and be like, oh, I'm sorry, that's not what we're talking about. Now, there is trust. Every single one of my partners, we trust each other to be able to make decisions and to not have to wait on each other. That's, business moves fast, especially as entrepreneurs. And we have to be able to have that. Like, I'm not going to slap your hand if you went off and did something, because we are aligned and we do have these conversations. And if something needs to happen, that other person's not around, or we need to just quick make a decision. Like, I want that for my partners. And I want them to be able to feel like they can do that with me. But we have to have a certain level of accountability. Like, we're going to mess up. We're not going to get it right. We're humans, but we have to own it too when we do. And know that there's psychological safety on the other side, that I'm not sharing this feedback because I'm trying to hurt you as a person or trying to hurt our partnership. It's because there's true benefit to having these conversations. Really appreciate that.
Absolutely. I think that's so important too, because I think that's what contributes a lot to imposter syndrome and other confidence challenges, is this fear that I can't make a mistake, right? That the partnership will be over if I make a mistake. And the reality is you're going to make a mistake, right? Nobody is perfect, and we make more mistakes when we feel anxious about it, when we don't feel safe to do it, right? And so I think even periodically having a lessons learned conversation with each other where you normalize making mistakes, right? Or what's going to happen? How are we going to handle it when somebody makes a mistake, right? Like, just put it out there. This is going to happen, right? This is not an if. This is going to happen. And we're prepared for that. And we're going to be honest with each other and communicate. And then just that sense of, okay, I know what will happen when this does happen, then I think we just generally feel less anxious about it.
Oh my gosh, so true. And those lessons learned, I mean, hopefully we're doing those with, our work teams, with our partners when we're working on something, with our clients. I know I'm always checking in too. What did we learn? What did we hear? What do we need to adjust for the next time? Whether it's the next time because this phase of a project's continuing, or the next time is just like, this was a really, a missed opportunity related to communication or whatever it was. We always want to be pulling lessons and learning. And that is another thing that I share with all my partners, because we are all learners and we're genuinely curious. It's not that we're looking to pick things apart. It's a mindset, right, that you have to have in terms of, working with other people.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that we all benefit from that, right? Because when I think about the entrepreneur that I was 10 years ago is very different from the one that I am today. And if we just stay in our comfort zone and we don't try new things, we don't give ourselves space to make mistakes and to learn new things, then we also don't grow and we don't get anywhere. And so I think that's part of it too, is just reframing how we think about this as more of learning and growth, as opposed to failure and mistakes, which are very emotionally charged.
Yes. So true. Oh my gosh. As you know, I could talk to you forever. We're getting to the end of our hour here, but I'm so grateful for all of the things that you've shared with us. And I guess my final question would be, as you look forward, what is it that you hope that we can build together, as friends, as partners, for the future of work? What does that look like for you when you think about it?
Oh, that's a good question. So I think this future of work space is still pretty wide open. I think there are a lot of open questions about what it's going to look like. And there's so much to what we're talking about in terms of the human side of what workplaces are going to look like. And so I'm hopeful that we can continue to collaborate and brainstorm around bringing our perspectives and our values into more organizations together.
Yeah.
And just moving that, I hope we can capitalize on the momentum that started and just keep sort of pushing that that ball forward, right?
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. That makes me so happy. It's something that I share too, and I know that we're always working towards that and open conversations and sharing information and how we can support different organizations that we've both been able to support, and that's amazing. And so I see that as the future too. And of course, as friends, always wanting to deepen that relationship too. So I really appreciate it. Thank you to everyone who shared your thoughts and comments, who joined in listening today, no matter where you are in the world, whether you've had your first sip of coffee, if you're a coffee drinker, or it's the other side of the day for you. Really appreciate it. If you're watching on replay, we're really grateful too. And send us your questions if you have any thoughts. We're both very active on LinkedIn here. We are streaming today to LinkedIn and YouTube. So definitely any thoughts, reach out, share your questions, any follow-up, anything that's working well for you in a partnership that you may want to impart upon us, because together is better. And we like those different perspectives. Really appreciate it. Any closing thoughts, Kim? And can you also share where the best place to reach you is outside of LinkedIn?
Yeah, well, my closing thought is just thank you. This has been such a great conversation, and you are so good at making me feel welcome and comfortable. And I feel like you said, I could talk to you all day. In terms of where to find me, I'm most active on LinkedIn, as you said. So LinkedIn, Kim Meninger is, I'm sort of going through a rebrand right now with my website, so I won't point people there, but LinkedIn is the place to go.
Fun. I just did the rebrand too. It's so fun. It's such an exciting process. It takes work, but I thank you for being here and, for being welcoming and inclusive too. It's been a pleasure to highlight you here, Kim. And for everyone, I'll be continuing this little mini series with highlighting other partners. If you missed past ones, you can find those on YouTube, and I'll drop a comment with that link there. Thank you again for watching, and we really appreciate you and hope you have a great week. Take care.